Welcome back. It's a municipal election year, but right now in Manchester, a major focus of politics and governance is the state's bail law following the release of a violent stabbing suspect. Mayor Jay Ruhe had been making this a top issue even before this case. Now he's become even more vocal, urging state lawmakers to make changes quickly. Mayor Ruhe is our guest this morning on Close Up. Mr. Mayor, thanks for being here.
Good morning, Adam. It's great to be with you.
So for those new to this story, there was a stabbing in Manchester earlier this month. The man charged was released from custody by a bail magistrate deemed not dangerous enough to be held. This last week, prosecutors sought to have his bail revoked, but the magistrate's decision was upheld. Now, Mr. Mayor, you were banging the drum on this from a long time back, but why didn't police fight in their initial efforts to have this individual held?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately what they came forward with is said that changes in the bail law need to be made. And this is an effort that we have to undertake both here at the municipal level and causing individuals up in Concord to recognize what we are experiencing down here. And then they made the attempt with the county prosecutor to go in and ultimately revoke the bail. And then what we saw on Wednesday when the individual was subsequently released and not held on bail, I think was an important decision. I think when you look at the city of Manchester in 2024, we had 24% of individuals who were released on bail subsequently rearrested. That objectively makes Manchester a less safe community to be in. And the question that I pose regularly is, what is it going to take? And where is the care, the cause, the concern for the victims of these violent crimes? Where's the concern for the restaurant goer who had to look out the window and see this violent stabbing take place and then understand that that person was then subsequently released? There's a trauma associated with that happens in a community when we have something like that occur. And we already have challenges with recruiting police officers. They do an amazing job in this city every single day, putting their life on the line. But this just creates another hurdle for them to have to leap over when people are just subsequently released.
Do we know why there's not a policy to make that ask initially? I guess the question is, and the supporters of the bail reform law are saying they should have said something at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think the police statement covered that when they were asked about it by WMUR on that Friday. They responded to that, and I think their point, though, at the end of their statement was spot on, that beyond the legal minutia of this, the problem still remains, that we have a problem with the bail law in the state of New Hampshire, and the impact of that on Manchester is profound. With that 24% accounts for over 700 individuals who were released and subsequently re-arrested for crimes here in the city. That objectively makes us a less safe community.
People are arguing that this was a self-defense case, that the suspect in this in this incident didn't initiate the confrontation.
I mean, I think when I talked to the chief of police and I spoke with the county attorney right after the decision was handed down by the judge in this case, when you have somebody who's chasing another individual down the street and displaying a weapon and trying to stab someone, I find that pretty hard to believe that that is self-defense.
Some elected officials on the other side of this debate have rallied around that self-defense claim, sounding a lot like they're defending the alleged perpetrator and not the victim. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to my earlier statement that I think the conversation here gets lost. And where is the concern for the victims in this? And, Governor Ayotte talks about this frequently, but when she did a ride-along last year with Manchester Police Department, the officer that she was with had the conversation with her that he had his finger bitten down to the bone and was out for 6 months as a result of that. We had the officer that was shot in Bedford earlier this year. These are substantial problems for our police, and why we take the focus off the victims in this instance is just unconscionable to me. On what planet does any of this make sense?
The added attention on this bail issue is new, but the cases like this and this argument, we've actually been hearing these for the last 7 years, and the arguments from the people who wrote the law are remarkably consistent. They are always saying this is the fault of law enforcement and not the law itself.
I struggle to see how one could make that leap in their mind. I think when we look at what goes on the ground here in the city of Manchester, the police, they do their job. They do exactly what they're supposed to do. They go in, they arrest a perpetrator, they go before a judge or a magistrate, and that individual might deem them, as in this instance, not a threat to the city of Manchester or whatever municipality it might happen to be in. This is not the fault of the Manchester Police Department or any other police department. This is a fault of the law being being enacted the way that it was designed to. And that's the challenge. And the profound issues that creates for the city of Manchester are clear as day for anyone to see.
Let's shift gears here. You have a unique perspective on the interplay between federal, state, and local, having worked for a member of Congress, Congressman Frank Guinta, who is very interested in cutting spending and reducing the size of government. Do you think the style and manner in which the Trump administration and Elon Musk in particular are going about making these cuts and layoffs endangers their ability to make lasting change just by the way they're going about it?
And I think it's incredibly important that we look at all forms of spending, both at the federal, at the state, as Governor Ayotte is doing, and right here at the local level. I think, and this is part of what he was elected to do, was to cut spending. Now, not all dollars are spent equally. There are a lot of good programs that I think we have to protect and preserve, and we are watching that very closely here at the city level. I've already talked to all of our department heads about how any cuts to spending would impact us. But I do think that any time that you are an elected official, and anytime we have divided government like we do here in Manchester and like we do at the federal level, I think things have to be done prudently and with thought and be deliberative in these approaches because of the impact that can have to people on the ground. Especially, being mayor, we are the closest to the people who elected us, and I think we have to be thoughtful. I think you have to be careful when the pendulum swings too far. So I would urge caution, but I think the overall goal of cutting spending is incredibly important.
To draw a parallel here, if you were to allow your top political donor to become a special city hall employee, go around to departments and start firing people, what do you think the reaction would be?
I mean, I think from my perspective, I think it's important that we have outside individuals that have different sets of expertise and experience. And I think anytime you're taking in more perspectives, I think is an important role to play.
We don't yet know who your opponent will be in this race for mayor coming up in November. Democrats are still trying to find their footing in Manchester after a tough couple of election cycles. What do you see as the defining issues in this race beyond public safety, which we've already talked about?
I think housing, and more specifically affordability of housing, is going to be incredibly important. We've taken a number of steps here in the city of Manchester to increase our supply. We've been consistently rated one of the top places, the top place to live in the United States of America, and but that creates upward pressure on housing prices. So we have to increase our supply. So we're looking at doing things like our zoning rewrite. The first time in 23 years, only the fourth time in the history of the city of Manchester that we've done this, with an eye towards getting more supply into the city. We were designated a housing champion by the BEA up in Concord, and that allows us to apply for some federal funds to help bring more housing into the city. Last year, we sold 15 different properties and put $1.13 million into our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We're going to come up with our second round of those surplus properties in the next couple months. So I think we have to get creative. I talked last week about the 3D printed homes. Obviously, the costs are increasing exponentially to do any level of construction. So if we can do something to cut down on the cost of production, then the housing should be cheaper on the back end when a consumer goes to purchase a house. So I think there are a number of different things that we can do, but I think with respect to the election this year, I think housing is going to be the top issue. And then the impact that has elsewhere too. Homelessness, certainly housing affordability. There's a direct correlation between the number of unhoused and pricing with respect to housing. I would point towards my conversations with people at Southern New Hampshire University or Elliott Hospital or CMC or businesses in the city. Often we don't talk about education or healthcare or business. We talk about workforce development and we talk about housing. So this is going to be a big key critical issue this year.
On homelessness, the ban on public camping has had a chance to take effect. What is the next step? What would you be doing in a second term on this issue?
Sure. So, I mean, we've undertaken 17 different initiatives here in the city since I was sworn in to help address this in a comprehensive way. On the enforcement side, addressing, as you mentioned, with banning and camping, but addressing the underlying causes of this, whether it be mental health, addiction, lack of employment, and then housing, of course, is that last piece. I do think that we have to look to break the number of unhoused. Everybody has to be treated differently. They're different, whether it's veterans, whether it's seniors, whether it's families, and breaking these down into manageable bite-sized pieces allows us to attack their specific issues. And, maybe there is funding available. Veterans, I think, is the perfect example of this. We started a veterans initiative to house the unhoused veterans population we have here. Since September, when we launched that, we've housed over 34 veterans who were previously homeless. That's a tremendous success. But there are, like the VA has been been incredibly instrumental with that. Working with seniors, there are going to be HUD vouchers available. They're, I think, breaking it down, but also we have to alleviate the pressure valve that we have in our emergency shelters. So let's say you address all the underlying drivers of homelessness. That individual still is not going to have $2,000 a month to go into an apartment. So working on things like transitional housing. We have a big proposal that we're going to unveil in the next week or two that has the potential to add, up to 30% more transitional units in our city. So that's getting people out of our shelters, getting people off of the streets, into housing, build that sustainable life, and move on.
As we wrap up here real quick, YDC property, as that becomes available or the state wants to talk about what to do with it, I know you said you want to have public hearings, but doesn't it have to be housing given the pressure and the importance of that issue?
Yeah, and I think ultimately what it'll likely look at is something like a mixed use where you are going to have some commercial, but housing I think it's an essential need not just for the city of Manchester, but for the state of New Hampshire. If you're looking at 50 to 60,000 units shy in the state of New Hampshire, housing has to be the top priority.
All right, Mayor Jay Ruway, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks again, Adam. Always appreciate it.
Okay, when we come back, why Senator Jeanne Shaheen is calling for sanctions to be lifted on Syria. Stay with us.